Before we dive into this unforgettable love story, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? Get ready for a tale about fate, chaos, and a love that begins with spilled wine and ends with forever. This is the story of Charlotte Evans, a passionate yet clumsy interior designer, and Julian West, a cold, brilliant tech entrepreneur, two complete opposites who crash into each other's lives at a wedding, quite literally. Charlotte Evans was late, again. And not just a few minutes late, the kind of late that made you seriously question all your life choices. She was sprinting, stumbling, in a long satin bridesmaid dress down the marble halls of the Bellevue Hotel, nearly face-planting every 10 steps. Her heels, which had seemed like the perfect glamorous touch this morning, now felt like twin torture devices. The bouquet she held was slightly crushed from her tight grip, and the strap of her purse had slid off her shoulder for the third time. All she wanted was to be early, helpful, maybe even graceful for once. But fate had other plans. The taxi took a wrong turn. The elevator was broken. Then she spilled her coffee on her only backup dress. And now, just moments before her best friend's ceremony was set to begin, Charlotte was charging up the staircase like a desperate woman on a mission. She turned the corner sharply, too sharply, and collided with something solid. Actually, someone. Her bouquet flew through the air, her purse hit the floor with a thud, and Charlotte felt herself tipping forward in a slow-motion disaster. Just as she prepared to faceplant into the hotel's decorative rug, a pair of strong arms grabbed her by the waist, steadying her before she completely lost balance. The scent of cedarwood and something dark and expensive filled her senses. For a split second she forgot who she was, where she was, heck, even what day it was. "Oh God," she gasped. "Please tell me I didn't just take out someone's grandfather." The man's voice was low, amused. "Not exactly." Charlotte blinked as she looked up. He wasn't a grandfather. He wasn't even close. He was, quite possibly, the most unfairly attractive man she'd ever seen. Midnight black hair, sharp jawline, piercing steel grey eyes, and a calm, collected air like someone who ran empires and didn't have time for chaotic bridesmaids. "You're late," he said, still holding her steady. She narrowed her eyes. "Thank you, Captain Obvious. Any more brilliant insights?" A flicker of a smile touched his lips, but he didn't let go of her until she tried to step back, only to realize her dress had caught on the buckle of her shoe. Of course, why not humiliate herself thoroughly? The man crouched down without hesitation, gently unhooking the fabric from her heel. "You may now continue your mission," he said dryly. Charlotte's face burned. "I was already on my way. He interrupted, voice cool. "Try not to break your neck before the toast." She grabbed her purse and bouquet and practically ran the rest of the way. But even with adrenaline pumping through her veins, she could still feel his eyes on her. The ceremony had just started by the time Charlotte slipped into place beside the other bridesmaids. Her best friend, bride and queen of perfection, shot her a sharp glare, but Charlotte barely noticed. Her mind was still spinning. That man. She scanned the groomsmen across the aisle. There he was, seated at the end, looking composed, calm, and, still staring at her. "Who's that?" she whispered to the bridesmaid next to her. "Julian West," her friend whispered back, eyes wide. "You don't know who that is?" Charlotte shook her head slightly. "He's the groom's best friend, and also the CEO of Westlink, a cybersecurity firm that just signed a defense contract with the federal government. He's one of the youngest billionaires in the country. Total enigma, doesn't do interviews, doesn't date publicly. Kind of terrifying." Charlotte felt her stomach drop. "And I almost flattened him like a pancake?" "Yup." Of course, her most embarrassing moment in recent memory had to be witnessed and caught by a man who could probably have her apartment repossessed with a single email. She kept her eyes on the officiant, willing herself not to glance over again. But when she did just once, she saw it. Julian West was still watching her, unblinking, curious. Charlotte shivered. This night was far from over. The wedding reception shimmered beneath golden string lights and warm music as champagne flowed and laughter filled the air. Charlotte kept herself busy, checking on the bride, steering guests away from the melting cake tier, and avoiding Julian West like he was a walking heart attack in a tux. She was halfway across the ballroom, reaching for a glass of red wine from a passing tray, when disaster struck again. She turned too quickly, collided with someone, and the wine? It arced through the air like a crime scene in slow motion. It hit squarely on the chest of a black suit, a very expensive-looking black suit. "Oh no," Charlotte whispered. Julian West stood before her, blinking, wine dripping down his shirt like battle wounds. This time she didn't even try to apologize. "I'm so sorry. This isn't a pattern, I swear. I mean, it's not usually this bad." Julian looked down at the damage, then up at her. "You're consistent, I'll give you that." She bent to retrieve a napkin. "Let me—" He stopped her with a gentle hand. "It's fine, just wine." "You're not going to sue me?" she asked, only half joking. He quirked an eyebrow. "Depends. Will you make it up to me?" Her heart stuttered. "Excuse me?" "Drinks," he said. "Join me, the bar. You owe me at least one shot of something." Charlotte looked around as if hoping someone would pull her away with a fake emergency, but no one did. And maybe she didn't want them to. "Okay," she said, "but I picked the drinks." Julian nodded, the corner of his mouth twitching. "Surprise me?" The bar at the edge of the ballroom was dimly lit and practically empty. Just a few lingering guests sipping cocktails and a bartender who looked like he'd seen it all. Charlotte perched on a high stool, crossing her legs and pretending like she wasn't painfully aware of Julian West standing next to her. "I should order something absurdly overpriced," she mused aloud, peering at the cocktail menu, "just to see if you flinch." "I don't flinch," Julian replied coolly. She arched an eyebrow. "Ever?" He turned slightly, his gaze catching hers. "Try me." Charlotte smirked. "2 shots of your best single malt, please." The bartender raised an eyebrow but said nothing. He poured the amber liquid with a flourish. Julian picked up his glass. "To chaos," he said. She mirrored him. "And to the bridesmaid who destroyed your tux." Their glasses clinked and Charlotte tipped her head back, letting the whiskey burn its way down. The heat in her chest was welcome, centering. "So, Mr. Enigma," she said, setting the glass down, "do you always save clumsy women from ruining your designer wardrobe?" "Only at weddings," he replied without missing a beat. She laughed for real this time. It surprised her. "So," Julian said, leaning against the bar, "you're an interior designer?" Charlotte blinked. "How do you know that?" "I asked." "Who?" "The bride." She narrowed her eyes playfully. "You were that curious?" Julian's expression didn't change, but there was something in his eyes, a spark beneath the ice. "Let's just say I like to know the people who throw wine at me." "I didn't throw it," Charlotte said. "It was more of an aggressive splash." "A creative pour," he corrected. Another laugh bubbled out of her and she hated how easy it was to smile around him. "Why are you really here?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. "I promised my best friend I'd be his best man 5 years ago. Didn't expect to show up and meet someone." Charlotte looked at him for a beat too long. The room felt smaller, warmer. "Well," she said, breaking the tension with a light tone. "Lucky for you, this someone is full of surprises. You've only witnessed 2 disasters. I've got a few more up my sleeve." "I look forward to them," Julian said, and she couldn't tell if he was joking or if he meant every word. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of laughter, toasts, dancing couples and lingering glances. Charlotte made herself busy. She helped with cake logistics, distracted a flower girl having a meltdown, and tried to avoid Julian, even though she kept catching his eye across the room. Eventually, as guests started to thin out, she stepped outside into the cool air. The hotel's rooftop garden was peaceful and quiet. She leaned against the railing, exhaling. "You disappeared," came that familiar voice behind her. She turned. Julian was there, sans jacket now, sleeves rolled up, the top button of his shirt undone. Somehow it made him even more dangerous. "I needed air," she said. He came to stand beside her. "Do you always run when things get intense?" "Only when I'm being interrogated by billionaires." Julian chuckled. "Not interrogating, observing." "That's worse." Charlotte looked at him. The city lights sparkled below, but his eyes pulled more attention than the skyline. "You're not what I expected," he said. "Neither are you." Julian's voice dropped a little. "I think that's why I can't stop thinking about you." Charlotte felt her stomach flip. She looked down, gripping the railing tighter. Julian, I don't do flings, or weird hotel weddings that turn into rooftop heart-to-hearts. What do you do? He asked. Plans, she said. Spreadsheets, timelines. I know where I'm going. And where are you going now? She hesitated, then whispered, I don't know. Julian reached out, gently tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers brushed her cheek and her breath caught. Maybe, he said, we don't need to know everything. And then he kissed her. It wasn't rushed or forced, it was slow, intense, like he wanted her to understand exactly how serious he was. And for the first time in a very long time, Charlotte let go of the plan, the structure, the timeline, and she kissed him back. The next morning, Charlotte woke up with an embarrassing realization. She'd stayed up all night thinking about Julian West. Correction, dreaming about Julian West. She groaned, rolled over in bed, and pulled a pillow over her face. This was a problem. Her phone buzzed with a message. From Julian West. I hope your dress survived the evening better than my suit. Coffee later? Or should I bring more whiskey? She laughed. She shouldn't, but she did. And then she texted back. You get one coffee, but only if you promise no more questions about my timeline. Deal. Charlotte arrived at the cafe 10 minutes early and spent every second of it pacing near the front window, pretending not to care. Julian arrived 5 minutes late, on purpose she suspected, with that same effortless calm, dressed casually but still somehow commanding. Do you always wear outfits that make people assume you own the building? She teased. I do own the building, he replied smoothly. Charlotte blinked. You're kidding. Julian shrugged. It was a startup hub. I turned it into mixed-use office space. There's a yoga studio on the second floor if you're interested. She sat down, shaking her head with a laugh. I can't tell when you're being serious. That's part of my charm. They ordered coffees, hers a double espresso, his black no sugar, and fell into surprisingly easy conversation. No awkwardness, no pressure, just two people pretending they weren't falling into something way too fast. You know, Charlotte said, stirring her coffee, you've got this reputation. Oh? Julian leaned back. Do tell. Cold, calculated, emotionally, limited. Julian gave a small smile. Accurate mostly, until recently. She looked up. Until recently? His eyes didn't leave hers. Until a bridesmaid collided with me in a hotel hallway and turned my world upside down. Charlotte froze. For the first time in a long time, she didn't know what to say. You don't have to respond, Julian said. I'm not asking for anything. Just don't pretend it wasn't real. What happened at the wedding? She nodded slowly. I won't pretend, but I'm not rushing anything. Then don't rush, Julian said simply. I'm not going anywhere. Over the next few weeks, things got complicated. Charlotte was back to working full-time at her design firm. The Richmond project, the most important proposal she'd worked on in her career, was reaching a critical phase. It was the kind of project that could define her professional future. And then, one morning she walked into the glass conference room, portfolio in hand, and saw Julian West sitting at the head of the table. What? She blurted, stopping short. Julian looked up, perfectly composed. Good morning, Miss Harris. Miss Harris, she said, blinking. We're in a professional setting, he replied. I'm here as the firm's new lead investor. Charlotte almost dropped her folder. Julian didn't flinch, didn't blink. He just watched her, eyes unreadable. After the meeting, Charlotte cornered him near the elevators. You knew, she hissed. You knew this was my project. I did. And you didn't think to warn me? I figured it was better to show up in person. You're very expressive. I'm going to kill you. Julian chuckled. Probably. But first we build a skyscraper together. She stared at him. You're serious about this? Dead serious. This is a good investment, and working with you is a bonus. Charlotte sighed. This is a disaster. Julian stepped closer. It's only a disaster if you pretend we're strangers. And if we don't, then we build something bigger than blueprints. Her breath caught, and for the first time in her career, Charlotte realized that maybe, just maybe, the foundation she was building wasn't just made of steel and glass. That night, as she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, Charlotte couldn't stop replaying the day. Julian, the meeting, the elevator conversation, and worst of all, how her heart had skipped when he said we. The man was dangerous, and she was dangerously close to letting him in. Charlotte didn't sleep much. The next morning, she dragged herself to work armed with coffee, determination, and a silent promise. No matter how distracting Julian West was, she would not let him throw her off track. The project came first. Her career came first. Except there he was again, standing by the model of the Richmond Tower in the office showroom, hands in his pockets, eyes scanning every line like a sculptor examining his next masterpiece. He looked up. "Morning," he said. "Don't talk to me before 10 a.m., Charlotte replied, walking past. Julian followed. "I brought croissants. Bribery? Strategic morale building." She stopped, turned and crossed her arms. "What are you doing, Julian?" He met her eyes. "Being here, supporting the project, watching you." She rolled her eyes. "You really think you can stand around looking intense and charming and that will just magically make me forget what a bad idea this is?" "Yes." She nearly choked on her coffee. "Are you serious?" "Completely." Charlotte opened her mouth to retort but then caught herself. He wasn't wrong. That was the worst part. She sighed, snatched a croissant, and walked away. Julian smiled to himself. Victory? Not quite, but progress. Later that day, they were reviewing the materials for the central atrium when Julian leaned in slightly, voice low. "You're avoiding talking about last night." "I'm avoiding setting this building on fire." "Same difference." Charlotte stared at the mock-up. "We're not doing this now." "Then when?" She turned to him, frustration bubbling. "Julian, you're my investor. That's already murky enough. If anyone finds out, let them. I can't work like this." "You can. You just don't want to admit that you want to." His voice was quiet, steady, dangerous. Charlotte's chest tightened. "I need space," she whispered. Julian nodded. "Take it, but don't expect me to forget what's between us." That night, Charlotte stayed late. The office emptied. The city lights flickered outside. She sat at her desk staring at blueprints, but her mind kept drifting, to him, to the look in his eyes, the way he always stood too close, the way her name sounded when he said it. She rubbed her temples and muttered, "This can't happen." And yet, when her phone lit up with a message that read, "Look outside," she got up, walked to the window, and saw Julian leaning against his car, holding 2 cups of coffee. She hesitated. Then she smiled and went to meet him. They drove in silence through the city. No destination, just movement. Julian handed her the second cup. "You needed space," he said. "I brought caffeine to go with it." Charlotte sipped quietly. "You're persistent." "I've never been interested in someone who made me want to be." She turned to him. "You're not afraid?" "I'm terrified, but I've spent my whole life avoiding risk in the one area that actually matters. Maybe it's time I stop." They pulled up to a quiet overlook. The city spread below like a galaxy of artificial stars. Julian turned off the engine. "Talk to me," he said. Charlotte looked at him for a long time. "I don't want to get hurt." "You won't." "You can't promise that." "No," he agreed, "but I can promise I'll be all in." She closed her eyes. The fear was still there, but so was the possibility. "I hate how much I like you." Julian smiled. "That's a start." A week passed. Meetings came and went. The Richmond Tower project gained momentum. Charlotte and Julian kept things strictly professional, at least on the surface. But beneath the surface, glances lingered too long. Coffee breaks stretched past their limits. And whenever Charlotte smiled, just slightly, Julian looked like a man who had just seen sunlight for the first time. Then came the investor gala. The firm needed to make a strong impression. Everyone would be there. Stakeholders, competitors, the press. Charlotte wore a dark green dress that shimmered like starlight, her hair swept up, her earrings delicate, her confidence sharp as steel. Julian noticed her the second she stepped into the venue. He was across the room in a black tux, drink in hand, talking to an investor, but his eyes never left her. When their gazes finally met, everything else disappeared. He walked toward her slowly. "Charlotte," he said, his voice low, warm. Mr. West, she replied, raising an eyebrow. His smile deepened. You look like you own the room. I intend to. Good. Then it won't matter that I'm about to ask you to dance. He offered his hand. She hesitated, then took it. They glided across the floor. People watched. Cameras clicked. But they were locked in their own gravity, a world where everything else blurred. You do realize this will be on every tech blog tomorrow, she whispered. Let them write. Julian, you've built a legacy of privacy. He looked down at her. And you've built a legacy of holding everything in. What if for once we both did something reckless? Charlotte said nothing. Her chest rose and fell. He leaned in, his voice brushing her ear like a secret. I'm not going anywhere. Later that night, after the gala ended, Charlotte walked out onto the hotel balcony overlooking the city skyline. The stars were faint, but the city lights were brilliant. Julian joined her, 2 glasses of champagne in hand. He handed her one. To us if we dare. Charlotte laughed softly. That sounds like a headline. I'm serious. I know. He turned to her. I've had companies, partnerships, awards, but I've never had someone who saw through all of it. Charlotte looked at him. I don't want to be just another chapter in your story, Julian. You're not, he said quietly. You're the part where everything changes. And before she could respond, he kissed her. Not rushed, not for show, just real. Charlotte melted into him. And for the first time, she didn't feel like she had to hold anything back. The next morning, the office buzzed with whispers. Photos from the gala had already hit the media. Julian West and Horizon's lead architect seen dancing under the stars. Some critics speculated romance, some called it scandal, others called it branding genius. Charlotte read them all silently. Julian walked into her office holding 2 coffees. No regrets? He asked. She looked up. Not yet. Want to have lunch with me? She narrowed her eyes. A real lunch or another investor meeting disguised as a date? He smirked. You'll have to find out. She took the coffee and stood. You're lucky I like surprises. And you're lucky I never backed down from a challenge. They walked out together, into the city, into the unknown, together. The weeks that followed weren't a fairy tale. Yes, Charlotte and Julian shared quiet mornings and late-night dinners, flirted between blueprints and board meetings, and even had a private joke about how many times people tried to accidentally walk into Julian's office when she was there. But love in the public eye? That was never simple. It started with rumours, small ones, West's latest muse, or sleeping with the architect. But they snowballed quickly. Clients whispered. Investors raised eyebrows. Charlotte's own colleagues began to question if she was being favoured. And one morning, as Charlotte entered the Horizon boardroom, she noticed the shift. People stopped talking when she stepped in. A few exchanged looks. Julian hadn't arrived yet. She took her usual seat, but her hands trembled slightly beneath the table. Then the firm's director, Marianne Cross, cleared her throat. Charlotte, she said, her tone neutral. Can I see you in my office after this? Charlotte nodded, already knowing what it was about. Inside the director's office, the blinds were half closed. A soft hum from the city filtered through. Marianne leaned back in her chair. You've been one of our most talented architects for years. Charlotte stood tall. Thank you. But there's talk, Charlotte, about the project, about your relationship with Mr. West. Charlotte inhaled sharply. Are you implying? I'm not implying anything, but others are. Charlotte clenched her jaw. I earned this position. I earned this project. I know that. But perception shapes reality in our world. Charlotte looked away. Marianne's voice softened. All I'm saying is, be careful. That night, Charlotte sat in Julian's penthouse, legs curled on his couch, wine in hand, but her mind far from relaxed. Julian entered from the kitchen, drying his hands. You've been quiet. She looked up. They're doubting me, Julian. He paused. Because of us. He crossed the room, sat beside her. Then we face it. She looked at him. This was supposed to be about the project, about my career. I fought so hard to get where I am, and now people are acting like I just slept my way to the top. Julian touched her hand gently. Then let's do what we do best. Let's build something no one can tear down. 2 days later, Horizon Construction released an official statement. Julian West had finalised the transfer of his stake in the Richmond Tower project to another investor, removing himself from all direct influence. The message was clear. Charlotte had earned her place. The backlash stopped. Respect returned. And in the shadows, Julian watched her shine without needing his protection. On the final day of construction, the Richmond Tower glowed under the sunset. Glass reflected gold. Steel bones stood proud. Charlotte stood at the rooftop, alone, soaking in the view. Julian stepped up beside her. "You did it." She turned. "We did it." He smiled. "But it was always you." She looked at him. Really looked. "I was terrified to fall for you," she admitted. He took her hands. "Then fall, I'll catch you every time." She leaned in and kissed him as the city lit up behind them. Weeks passed. The Richmond Tower became a local landmark, hailed not just for its design, but for the story behind it. Charlotte was no longer just an architect. She was the architect. And yet something more beautiful was being built in private, something only she and Julian understood. They had settled into an unexpected rhythm. She still lived in her apartment, kept her independence, and insisted on paying her half at dinner. Julian, despite his fortune, learned to slow down, to cook with her, to walk without a destination, to love quietly. But Julian West was still a man of bold gestures, and he had one more surprise. It began with a note on Charlotte's pillow. "Wear something simple. Comfortable shoes. I'll pick you up at 4. No name, no explanation. But the handwriting, sharp, confident, unmistakably his. Charlotte raised an eyebrow but smiled. Whatever Julian had planned, it would be unforgettable. They drove for nearly an hour, through quiet hills, winding back roads, until the car pulled into a clearing near the woods. A wooden path surrounded by lanterns and floating petals stretched into the trees. "Julian, what is this?" He didn't answer. He just held out his hand. She took it. They walked in silence, the evening breeze soft on their faces, the sun lowering in the sky. And then, just as they turned a final bend, Charlotte stopped in her tracks. A small open-air platform sat above a tranquil lake. String lights swayed gently, candles lined the edges, and in the centre, a table set for 2 beside a small fire pit and an arch of wildflowers. It was breathtaking. Julian led her to the edge of the dock where 2 chairs waited, but he didn't sit. Instead, he knelt. Charlotte's breath caught, no speech, no crowd, no fanfare, just him on one knee holding a simple black velvet box. "I've done everything in life with precision, logic, caution," he said softly. "But you are the beautiful chaos that rewrote all of that. You challenge me. You make me laugh. You bring colour into a world I didn't know was grayscale." He opened the box. Inside, a ring of white gold with a tiny sapphire set beside the diamond. "Marry me, Charlotte. Let's build the rest of our lives together." Charlotte stared at him. Tears blurred her vision. She laughed through them, then dropped to her knees, cupped his face, and whispered, "Yes. Yes to all of it." They stayed there on the wooden dock, wrapped in each other's arms, while the lanterns flickered on the water. No audience, no cameras, just love, pure, honest, unshakable. That night, under a blanket of stars, they didn't talk about venues or guest lists. They didn't worry about dates or details. They just danced, barefoot, clumsy, laughing, in the middle of nowhere. Because when 2 people find the kind of love that neither power nor wealth can buy, they know that everything else will fall into place. The wedding. It was never going to be traditional. Not with Julian West. And definitely not with Charlotte Green, the clumsy, stubborn architect who stole his heart with a wine spill and a sideways glance. They chose a late autumn date when the leaves were golden and the air carried just the right kind of chill. The venue, an old converted vineyard outside the city, intimate and open air, surrounded by trees and the laughter of people who mattered most. Only 30 guests, no media, no announcements in magazines, just their story, unfolding where no spotlight could reach it. Charlotte wore a cream-coloured dress with long sleeves and a flowy silhouette. She walked barefoot down the aisle lined with candles, her veil dancing in the wind. Julian, in a charcoal grey suit, didn't move as she approached, his eyes locked on hers like it was the first time he'd seen her. As she stepped beside him, he leaned in and whispered, Still the best architectural decision I've ever made. Charlotte laughed, wiping a tear from the corner of her eye. Don't you start, or I'll cry before the vows. They didn't write speeches. Instead, they spoke from the heart. Julian said, I spent most of my life building empires. I never thought I'd build a home with someone who turns chaos into beauty, challenge into strength, and ordinary moments into everything. Charlotte replied, You taught me that vulnerability isn't weakness, that love isn't about safety. It's about jumping and trusting someone will catch you. I jumped. You were already there, waiting. They exchanged rings. They kissed before the officiant even finished the line. And everyone clapped. Not because it was perfect, but because it was real. The reception, the tables were mismatched. The food was homemade. There was no first dance until Brian, Julian's best friend and original groom from that chaotic wedding months ago, turned up the music and shouted, Just dance, you two. So they did. Charlotte slipped on her hem halfway through and Julian caught her again. Some things never change, he whispered. I hope they never do, she whispered back. That night, long after the last guest left, Charlotte and Julian sat on the grass behind the vineyard, shoes off, watching the stars. Charlotte rested her head on his shoulder. What now? She asked. Julian kissed her temple. Now we live, building love. Maybe adopt a rescue dog. Maybe take a few spontaneous trips. Maybe we crash another wedding, she joked. He smirked. Only if you promise to trip into me again. She laughed. Deal. 1 year later, the Richmond Tower now stood as both a symbol of innovation and of the love that helped complete it. Horizon Construction featured Charlotte in a national design showcase. Julian West, now semi-retired from day-to-day operations, focused on mentoring young entrepreneurs, and their apartment, a blend of minimalist tech genius and chaotic creativity. She painted, he built apps. They had mismatched mugs and a cluttered kitchen drawer full of takeout menus, and they were happy. Final scene. Charlotte was curled on the couch one evening, flipping through a scrapbook of their wedding, when Julian walked in with takeout and a sheepish grin. What? He held out a tiny onesie that said, Future Architect, slightly clumsy. Charlotte stared at it, then looked up at him. He nodded slowly. We're going to need a crib. Her hand flew to her mouth, eyes wide, tears instantly forming. You're serious? Julian sat beside her, placing a hand on her stomach. We're going to build something new now. Charlotte kissed him, laughing, crying, and completely overwhelmed. And in that moment she knew. No design she'd ever draft would come close to the masterpiece they were already creating together. What did you think of Julian and Charlotte's love story? Leave your thoughts in the comments. Rate the story from 0 to 10. And don't forget to click the like button, share the video, and subscribe to Moments of the Heart for more inspiring and emotional tales.